Hello everyone, welcome to my channel Oluwaseyi Alade Art. Today we are reading aloud The Adventures of Captain Underpants. Action, thrills, laughs. The first epic novel by Dave Pilkey. Chapter 1. George and Harold. Meet Judge Beard and Harold Hutchins. George is the kid on the left with a tie and a flat top. Harold is the one on the right with a t-shirt and a bad haircut. Remember that now. Flower shop, pick your own roses. George and Harold were best friends. They had a lot in common. They lived right next door to each other, and they were both in the same fourth grade class at Jerome Hotsweet's elementary school. George and Harold were usually responsible kids. Whenever anything had happened, George and Harold were usually responsible. Flower shop, pick your noses. But don't get the wrong idea about this too. George and Harold were actually very nice boys. No matter what everybody else thought, they were good, sweet, and lovable. Well, okay, maybe they weren't so sweet and lovable, but they were good nonetheless. It's just that George and Harold each had a silly streak, a mile long. Usually, that silly streak was hard to control. Sometimes it got them into trouble. And once it got them into big trouble. But before I can tell you that story, I have to tell you this story. Chapter 2. Treehouse Comics Inc. After a hard day of cracking jokes, pulling pranks, and causing mayhem at school, George and Harold liked to rush to the old tree house in George's backyard. Inside the tree house were two big old fluffy chairs, a table, a cupboard crammed with junk food, and a padlock crate filled with pencils, pens, and stacks of paper. Now, Harold loved to draw, and George loved to make up stories. And together the two boys spent hours and hours writing and drawing their very own comic books. Over the years, they'd created hundreds of their own comics, starring dozens of their own superheroes. First there was Dogman, then came Timmy the Talking Toilet, and who could forget the Amazing Cow Lady? But the all-time greatest superhero they ever made up had to be the amazing Captain Underpants. George came up with the idea. Most superheroes look like they're flying around in their underwear, he said. Well, this guy actually is flying around in his underwear. The two boys laughed and laughed. Yeah, said Harold. He could fight with wedgie power. George and Harold spent entire afternoons writing and drawing the comic adventures of Captain Underpants. He was their coolest superhero ever. Luckily for the boys, the secretary at Jerome Hotsweet's elementary school was much too busy to keep an eye on the copy machine. So whenever they got a chance, Harold and George would sneak into the office and run off several hundred copies of their latest Captain Underpants adventure. After school, they sold their homemade comics on the playground for 50 cents each. Chapter 3. The Adventures of Captain Underpants. Written by George Beard. Cartoons by Harold Hutchins. The Really Cool Adventures of Captain Underpants. Written by George Beard. Drawn by Harold Hutchins. It was a time of darkness and despair for planet Earth. Bad guys had taken over the streets, and all of the superheroes in the world were too old to fight evil. Hey! Ha 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 ha. Then along came a new improved extra strength superhero. Tra-la-la! Look up in the sky. It's a bird. It's a plane. It's a egg salad sandwich. No way. I'm Captain Underpants. Captain Underpants was faster than a speeding waistband. Zoom! More powerful than boxer short. Zip! And able to leap tall buildings without getting a wedge. Tra-la-la! Night and day, Captain Underpants watched over the city, fighting for truth, justice, and all that is free, shrunk, and cottony. Meanwhile, at a nearby elementary school. Turn the page. It was Dinky Tacker's surprise day at the cafeteria. Yuck! Everybody hated it so much, they all threw it away. Trash! Soon the cafeteria food came to life. I am the inedible hunk. The monster ran around the school eating everything in sight. Help! The inedible hunk just ate up 15 folding chairs and the gym teacher. Oh no, not folding chairs, said the principal. This looks like a job for Captain on the Band. Tra-la-la! Captain Underpants shot lots of underwear at the monster, but it didn't do any good. Zip, zip. So Captain Underpants took off running. The inedible hunk chased him. Help! And chased him. Help! And chased him. Finally, the inedible hunk got too tired and thirsty to chase Captain Underpants. How about a nice drink of water? So the monster took a long drink from a shiny white bowl. Up, when suddenly, flush! Hooray for Captain Underpants! And so the inedible hunk got flushed away and was never heard from again. Tra-la-la! The end. Don't miss our next existing adventure, Captain Underpants and the Attack of the Talking Toilets. Coming soon to a playground near you. Treehouse Comics, Inc. Chapter 4. Mean Old Mr. Croup. Do you see that old guy looking out the window up there? That's Mr. Croup, the principal. Now, Mr. Croup was the meanest, sorest old principal in the whole history of Jerome Hartwaite's elementary school. He hated laughter and singing. He hated the sounds of children playing at recess. In fact, he hated children altogether. And guess which two children Mr. Croup hated most of all? If you guessed George and Harold, you're right. Mr. Croup hated George and Harold. He hated their pranks and their wisecracks. He hated their silly attitudes and their constant giggling. And he especially hated those awful Captain Underpants comic books. I'm going to get those boys one day, Mr. Croup vowed. One day. Very, very soon. Neil here. Chapter 5. One day, very, very soon. Remember when I said that George and Harold's silly streak got them into big trouble once? Well, this is the story of how that happened and how some huge pranks and a little blackmail turned their principal into the coolest superhero of all time. It was the day of the big football game between the Howitz Knuckleheads and the Stubbornville Stingbuds. The bleachers were filled with fans. Jerome Hartswick Elementary see our big football game today. The cheerleaders ran onto the field and shook their pom-poms over their heads. A fine black dust drifted out of their pom-poms and settled all around them. "Give me a K!" shouted the cheerleaders. "K!" repeated the fans. "Give me an N!" shouted the cheerleaders. "N!" repeated the fans. "Give me an achoo!" sneezed the cheerleaders. "Achoo!" repeated the fans. "Achoo! Achoo! Achoo!" The cheerleaders sneezed and sneezed and sneezed some more. They couldn't stop sneezing. "Hey!" shouted a fan in the bleachers. "Somebody sprinkled black pepper into the cheerleaders' pom-poms." "I wonder what did that?" asked another fan. The cheerleaders stumbled off the field, sneezing and dripping with mucus, as the marching and band members took their places. But when the band began to play, steady streams of bubbles began blowing out of their instruments. Bubbles were everywhere. Up and down the field, the marching band slipped and slid, leaving behind a thick trail of wet, bubbly foam. "Hey!" shouted a fan in the bleachers. "Somebody poured bubble bath into the marching band's instruments." "I wonder what did that?" asked another fan. Soon the football teams took the field. The knuckleheads kicked the ball. Up, up, up went the ball. Higher and higher it went. The ball sailed into the clouds and kept right on going until nobody could see it anymore. "Hey!" shouted a fan in the bleachers. "Somebody filled the game ball with helium." "I wonder who did that?" asked another fan. But the missing ball didn't make any difference because at that moment, the knuckleheads were rolling around the field, scratching and itching like crazy. "Hey!" shouted the coach. "Somebody replaced our deep-heating muscle rub lotion with Mr. Prankster's extra scratchy itching cream." "We wonder who did that," shouted the fans in the bleachers. The whole afternoon went on much the same way, with people shouting everything from "Hey, somebody put sea monkeys in the lemonade" to "Hey, somebody glued all the bathroom doors shut." Before long, most of the fans in the bleachers had gotten up and left. The big game had been forfeited, and everyone in the entire school was miserable. Jerome Hopkins Elementary. Boy, our feet smell bad. Everyone, that is, except for two giggling boys crouching in the shadows beneath the bleachers. "Those were our best pranks yet," laughed Harold. "Yep," chuckled George. "They'll be hard to top, that's for sure." "I just hope we don't get busted for this," said Harold. "Don't worry," said George. "We covered our tracks really well. There's no way we'll get busted." Chapter 6. Busted. The next day at school, an announcement came over the loudspeakers. "George Baird and Harold Hutchins, please report to Principal Krupp's office at once." "Uh-oh," said Harold. "I don't like the sound of that." "Don't worry," said George. "They can't prove anything." George and Harold entered Principal Croup's office and sat down on the chairs in front of his desk. The two boys had been in this office together countless times before, but this time was different. Mr. Croup was smiling. As long as George and Harold had known Mr. Croup, they had never ever seen him smile. Mr. Croup knew something. "I didn't see you boys at the big game yesterday," said Mr. Croup. "Oh no," said George. "We weren't feeling well." Yeah," Harold stammered nervously. We went home." "Oh, that's too bad," said Principal Croup. "You boys missed a good game." George and Harold quickly glanced at each other, gulped, and tried hard not to look guilty. "Lucky for you, I have a videotape of the whole thing," Mr. Croup said. He turned on the television in the corner and pressed the play button on the VCR. A black and white image appeared on the TV screen. It was an overhead shot of George and Harold sprinkling pepper into the cheerleaders' pom-poms. Next came a shot of George and Harold pouring liquid bubble bath into the marching band's instruments. "How do you like the pregame show?" asked Mr. Croup with a devilish grin. George eyed the television screen in terror. He couldn't answer. Harold's eyes were glued to the floor. He couldn't look. The tape went on, revealing all of George and Harold's behind-the-scenes antics. By now, both boys were eyeing the floor, squirming nervously and dripping with sweat. Mr. Croup turned off the TV. "You know," he said, "ever since you boys came to this school, it's been one prank after another. First you put dissected frogs in the jello salad at the parent-teacher banquet. Then you made it snow in the cafeteria. Then you rigged all the intercoms so they played Weird A. Yavok songs full blast for 6 hours straight. For 4 long years, you two have been running amok in this school, and I've never been able to prove anything until now." Mr. Croup held the videotape in his hand. "I took the liberty of installing tiny video surveillance cameras all around the school. I knew I'd catch you two in the act one day. I just didn't know it would be so easy." Chapter 7. A Little Blackmail. Mr. Croup sat back in his chair and chuckled to himself for a long time. Finally, George got up the courage to speak. "Oh, what are you going to do with that tape?" he said. "I thought you'd never ask," laughed Principal Croup. "I've thought long and hard about what to do with this tape," Mr. Croup said. "At first, I thought I'd send copies to your parents." The boys swallowed hard and sank deeply into their chairs. "Then I thought I might send a copy to the school board," Mr. Croup continued. "I could get you both expelled for this." The boys swallowed harder and sank deeper into their chairs. "Finally, I came to a decision," Mr. Croup concluded. "I think the football team will be very curious to find out just who was so responsible for yesterday's fiasco. I think I'll send a copy to them." George and Harold leaped out of their chairs and fell to their knees. "No," cried George. "You can't do that. They'll kill us." "Yeah," begged Harold. "They'll kill us every day for the rest of our lives." Mr. Croup laughed and laughed. "Ha ha 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 ha. Please have mercy," the boys cried. "We'll do anything." "Anything?" asked Principal Croup with delight. He reached into his desk, pulled out a list of demands and tossed it at the boys. If you don't want to be dead as long as you live, you follow these rules exactly. George and Harold carefully looked over the list. "This is blackmail," said George. "Call it what you like," Principal Croup snapped. "But if you don't follow that list exactly, then this tape becomes the property of the Hogwarts knuckleheads." Rules: 1. No more practical jokes or pranks. 2. No laughing or smiling. 3. No more. 4. No more Captain Underpants. 5. Wash my car every. 6. Mow my. Chapter 8. Crime and Punishment. At 6 o'clock the next morning, George and Harold dragged themselves out of bed, walked over to Mr. Croup's house, and began washing his car. Then while Harold scrubbed the tires, George roamed around the yard, pulling up all the weeds and crabgrass he could find. Afterward, they cleaned the gutters and washed all the windows on Mr. Croup's house. At school, George and Harold sat up straight, listened carefully, and spoke only when spoken to. They didn't tell jokes. They didn't pull pranks. They didn't even smile. Their teacher kept pinching herself. "I just know this is a dream," she said. At lunch, the two boys vacuumed Mr. Croup's office, shined his shoes, and polished his desktop. At recess, they clipped his fingernails and ironed his tie. Each spare moment in the boys' daily schedule was spent catering to Mr. Croup's every whim. After school, George and Harold mowed Mr. Croup's lawn, tended his garden, and began painting the front of his house. At sunset, Mr. Croup came outside and handed each boy a stack of books. "Gentlemen," he said, "I've asked your teachers to give you both extra homework. Now go home, study hard, and I'll see you back here at 6 o'clock tomorrow morning. We've got a busy day ahead of us." "Thank you, sir," moaned the boys. George and Harold walked home dead tired. "Man, this is the worst day of my entire life," said George. "Don't worry," said Harold. "We only have to do this for 8 more years. Then we can move away to some far-off land where they'll never find us. Maybe Antarctica." "I've got a better idea." Hypno ring. He took a piece of paper out of his pocket and handed it to Harold. It was an old magazine ad for the 3D hypno ring. "How's this going to help us?" asked Harold. "All we got to do is hypnotize Mr. Croup," said George. "We'll make him give us the video and forget this whole mess ever happened." "That's a great idea," said Harold. "And the best part is we only have to wait 4 to 6 weeks for delivery." Chapter 9. 4 to 6 weeks later. After 4 to 6 weeks of back-breaking slave labor, grueling homework assignments, and humiliating good behavior at school, a package arrived in George's mailbox from the Lil Wise Guy Novelty Company. It was a 3D hypno ring. "Hallelujah!" cried George. "It's everything I ever hoped for." Let me see, said Harold. "Don't look directly at it," warned George. "You don't want to get hypnotized, do you?" "Do you really think it will work?" asked Harold. "Do you really think we can amaze our friends, control our enemies, and take over the world, just like the ad says?" It's better work, said George, or else we just wasted 4 whole bucks. Chapter 10. The 3D Hypno Ring. The next morning, George and Harold didn't arrive early at Mr. Krupp's house to wash his car and reshingle his roof. In fact, they were even a little late getting to school. When they finally showed up, Mr. Krupp was standing at the front door waiting for them, and boy was he mad. Mr. Krupp escorted the boys into his office and slammed the door. "All right, where were you two this morning?" "He wanted to come over to your house," said George, "but we were busy trying to figure out the secret of this ring." "What ring?" snapped Mr. Krupp. George held up his hand and showed the ring to Principal Krupp. "It's got one of those weird patterns on it," said Harold. "If you stare at it long enough, a picture appears." "Well, hold it still," snarled Mr. Krupp. "I can't see the darn thing." "I have to look it back and forth," said George, "or else it won't work." Mr. Krupp's eyes followed the ring back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, and back and forth. "You have to stare deeper into the ring," said Harold. "Deeper, deeper, deeper, deeper." "You're getting sleepy," said George. "Very sleepy." Mr. Krupp's eyelids began to droop. "I'm so sleepy," he mumbled. After a few minutes, Mr. Krupp's eyes were closed tight, and he began to snore. "You are under our spell," said George. "When I snap my fingers, you will obey our every command." Snap. "I will obey," mumbled Mr. Krupp. "All right," said George. "Have you still got that videotape of me and Harold?" "Yes," mumbled Mr. Krupp. "Well, hand it over, huh?" George instructed. Mr. Krupp unlocked a large file cabinet and opened the bottom drawer. He reached in and handed George the videotape. George stuffed it into his backpack. Harold took a different video out of his backpack and put it into the file cabinet. "What's that video?" asked George. "It's one of my little sister's old Boomer the Purple Dragon sing-along videos." "Nice start," said George. Chapter 11. Fun with Hypnosis. When Harold bent down to close the file cabinet, he took a quick look inside. "Whoa!" he cried. "Look at all the stuff in here." The file cabinet was filled with everything Mr. Krupp had taken away from the boys over the years. There were slingshots, whoopee cushions, skateboards, fake doggy doo-doo, you name it, it was in there. "Look at this," cried George. "A big stack of Captain Underpants comics." "He's got every issue," said Harold. For hours, the two boys sat on the floor laughing and reading their comics. Finally, George looked up at the clock. "Yikes," he said. "It's almost lunchtime. We better clean up the mess and get to class." The boys looked up at their principal, who had been standing behind them in a trance all morning. "Gee, I almost forgot about Mr. Krupp," said Harold. "What should we do with him?" "Do you want to have some more fun?" said George. "Why not?" said Harold. "I haven't had any fun in the last 4 to 6 weeks. Cool, said George. He walked up to Mr. Croup and snapped his fingers. Snap. You are a chicken, he said. Suddenly, Mr. Croup leaped onto his desk and flapped his arms. Cluck, 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 he cried, kicking his papers off the desk behind him and pecking at his pen and pencil set. George and Harold howled with laughter. Let me try, said Harold. You were a monkey. You got to snap your fingers, said George. Oh yeah, said Harold. Snap. You are a monkey. Suddenly, Mr. Croup sprang off his desk and began swinging from the fluorescent light fixtures. Ooh, 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 he shrieked, leaping from one side of the room to the other. George and Harold laughed so hard they almost cried. My turn, said George. Let's see, what should we turn him into next? I know, Harold said, holding up a Captain Underpants comic. Let's turn him into Captain Underpants. Good idea, said George. Snap. You are now the greatest superhero of all time, the amazing Captain Underpants. Mr. Croup tore down the red curtain from his office window and tied it around his neck. Then he took off all his shoes, socks, shirt, pants, and his awful toupee. Tra-la-la-la, he sang. Mr. Croup stood before them looking quite triumphant, with his cape blowing in the breeze of the open window. George and Harold were dumbfounded. You know, said George, he kind of looks like Captain Underpants. Yeah, Harold replied. After a short silence, the two boys looked at each other and burst into laughter. George and Harold had never laughed so hard in all their lives. Tears ran down their faces as they rolled about the floor, shrieking in hysterics. After a while, George pulled himself up from the floor for another look. Hey, George cried. Where'd he go? Chapter 12. Out the window. George and Harold dashed to the window and looked out. There, running across the parking lot, was a pudgy old guy in his underwear with a red cape flowing behind him. Mr. Croup, come back, shouted Harold. He won't answer to that, said George. He thinks he's Captain Underpants now. Oh no, said Harold. He's probably running off to fight crime, said George. Oh no, said Harold. And we got to stop him, said George. Oh no, cried Harold. No way. Look, said George. He could get killed out there. Harold was unmoved. Or worse, said George. We could get into big trouble. You're right, said Harold. We got to go after him. The two boys opened the bottom file cabinet drawer and took out their slingshots and skateboards. Do you think we should bring anything else? Asked Harold. Yeah, said George. Let's bring the fake doggy doo-doo. Good thinking, said Harold. You just never know when this fake doggy doo-doo is going to come in handy. Harold stuffed Mr. Croup's clothes, shoes, and toupee into his backpack. Then together the two boys leaped out the window, slid down the flagpole, and took off on their skateboards after the amazing Captain Underpants. Chapter 13. Bank Robbers. George and Harold rode their skateboards all over town looking for Captain Underpants. "I can't find him anywhere," said Harold. "You'd think a guy like him would be easy to spot," said George. Then the boys turned the corner, and there he was. Captain Underpants was standing in front of a bank looking quite heroic. "Mr. Croup!" cried Harold. "Shh!" said George. "Don't call him that. Call him Captain Underpants." "Oh, yeah," said Harold. "And don't forget to snap your fingers," said George. "Right," said Harold. "Ring!" Robert's going on here. But before he got a chance, the bank doors flew wide open, and out stepped two robbers. The robbers took one look at Captain Underpants and stopped dead in their tracks. "Surrender," said Captain Underpants, "or I will have to resort to wedgie power." "Oh no," whispered Harold and George. Nobody moved for about 10 seconds. Finally, the robbers looked at each other and burst out laughing. They dropped their loot and fell to the sidewalk, screaming in hysterics. Almost immediately, the cops showed up and arrested the crooks. "Let that be a lesson to you," cried Captain Underpants. "Never underestimate the power of underwear." The police chief looked quite angry, marched over to Captain Underpants. "And just who the heck are you supposed to be?" the police chief demanded. "Why, I'm Captain Underpants, the world's greatest superhero," said Captain Underpants. "I fight for truth, justice, and all that is strong and cutting." "Oh, yeah," shouted the police chief. "Coffin, boys." One of the cops took out his handcuffs and grabbed Captain Underpants by the arm. "Uh-oh," cried George. "We gotta roll." Together, the two boys zoomed into the crowd, weaving in and out of cops and bystanders. Harold skated up to Captain Underpants and knocked the superhero off his feet. George caught him, and the boys skated away with Captain Underpants on their shoulders. "Stop!" cried the cops. But it was too late. George, Harold, and Captain Underpants were gone. Chapter 14. The Big Bang. After their quick escape, George, Harold, and Captain Underpants stopped on a deserted street corner to catch their breath. "Okay," said George. "Let's dehypnotize him quick before something else kaboom happens." A huge explosion came from the rare crystal shop across the street. Heavy smoke poured out of the building. Suddenly, two robots with one stolen crystal emerged from the smoke and jumped into an old van. "Did I just see two robots get into a van?" asked Harold. "You know," said George, "up until now, this story was almost believable." "Well, believable or not," said Harold, "we are not getting involved. I repeat, we are not getting involved." Just then, Captain Underpants leaped from the street corner and dashed in front of the van. "Stop in the name of the underwear!" he cried. "Uh-oh," cried George. "I think we're involved." The two robots started up the van and swerved around Captain Underpants. Unfortunately, the van brushed up against his red cape and it got caught. With a mighty jerk, Captain Underpants flipped backward, and the van pulled him along as it drove away. "Grab him!" cried George. The two boys skateboarded with all their might toward the speeding van and grabbed Captain Underpants by the ankles. "Help!" they cried as the van pulled them through the city streets. "Mommy," said the little boy sitting on the bench, "I just saw two robots driving a van with a guy in his underwear hanging off the back by a red cape, pulling two boys on skateboards behind him with his feet." "How do you expect me to believe such a ridiculous story?" asked his mother. Old abandoned warehouse. Crash! The bad guys. Screech! Finally, the van came to a screeching halt in front of an old abandoned warehouse. The sudden stop made Captain Underpants flip over the roof of the van and crash through the front door of the building. "Well, well, well," said a strange voice from inside the warehouse. "It looks as if we have a visitor." Chapter 15. Dr. Diaper. George and Harold hid behind the van until the coast was clear. Then they sneaked up to the hole in the door and peeked inside. Captain Underpants was all tied up. The two robots were standing guard, and a strange little man wearing a diaper was laughing maniacally. "I am the evil Dr. Diaper," the strange little man told Captain Underpants, "and you will be the first to witness my takeover of the world." Dr. Diaper placed the stolen crystal into a large machine called the Lasermatic 3000. The machine started to light up and make loud noises. Heavy G's began shifting and spinning, and a laser beam from the crystal shot straight up through a hole in the roof. In exactly 20 minutes, this laser beam would blow up the moon and send huge chunks of it crashing down upon every major city in the world. "Ha ha ha ha!" laughed Dr. Diaper. "Then I will rise from the rubble and take over the planet." "Only one thing can help us now," said George. "What?" asked Harold. "Rubber doggy doo-doo," said George. Harold took the fake doggy doo-doo and a slingshot from George's backpack and handed them to him. "Be careful," said Harold. "The fate of the entire planet is in our hands." With careful and precise aim, George shot the rubber doo-doo through the air and across the room. It landed with a plop right at the feet of Dr. Diaper. "Yes," whispered George and Harold. Plop! Dr. Diaper looked down at the doo-doo between his feet and turned bright red. "Oh dear me," he cried. "I'm dreadfully embarrassed. Please excuse me." He began to waddle toward the restroom. "This has never happened to me before, I assure you," he said. I guess with all the excitement, I just, oh dear." While Dr. Diaper was off changing himself, George and Harold sneaked into the old warehouse. Immediately, the robots detected the boys and began marching towards them. "Destroy the intruders," said the robots. "Destroy the intruders." George and Harold screamed and ran to the back of the warehouse. Luckily, George found two old boards and gave one of them to Harold. "We are not going to have to resort to extremely graphic violence, are we?" asked Harold. "I sure hope not," said George. Chapter 16. The extremely graphic violence chapter. Warning. The following chapter contains graphic scenes showing two boys beating the tar out of a couple of robots. If you have high blood pressure or if you faint at the slight sight of motor oil, we strongly urge you to take better care of yourself and stop being such a baby. Introducing Flip-O-Rama. Henley Brand. As everybody knows, nothing enhances silly antics sequences more than really cheesy animations. And the world's cheesiest animation just got even cheesier. If you thought Flip-O-Rama was cheesy, you ain't flipped nothing yet. Here's how it works. Option 1. If your device uses forward and backward buttons to turn the page, place one finger on each button, then quickly click forward and back between the two Flip-O-Rama pages. And repeat several times until the pictures appear to be poorly animated. Option 2. If your device lets you swipe to turn the page, use your finger to swipe once to the left, then swipe once to the right. Then keep swiping back and forth between the two Flip-O-Rama pages until the picture appears to be poorly animated. Flip-O-Rama works best if your device is turned vertically and you can only use them page at a time. Don't forget to add your own glitch. Flip-O-Rama 1. Robot Rampage. Flip-O-Rama 1. Robot Rampage. Flip-O-Rama 2. George Saves Harold. Flip-O-Rama 2. George Saves Harold. Flip-O-Rama 3. Harold Returns the Favor. Flip-O-Rama 3. Harold Returns the Favor. Flip-O-Rama 4. Mix nuts and bolts. Flip-O-Rama 4. Boing, boing. Mix nuts and bolts. Chapter 17. The Escape. After defeating the robots, George and Harold untied Captain Underpants. "Come on," cried Harold. "Let's get out of here." "Wait," said Captain Underpants. "We have to save the world first." So George, Harold, and Captain Underpants frantically looked all over the Laser-Matic 3000, searching for a way to shut it down and stop the inevitable disaster. Said Harold. "I think this might be a lever we want." He pulled the self-destruct lever with all his might. Suddenly, the Laser-Matic 2000 began to sputter and shake. The huge laser beam turned off, and pieces of the machine began falling off in all directions. "It's gonna blow!" cried Harold. "Run for your lives!" "Not so fast!" screamed Dr. Dapper, what appeared out of nowhere. "You demolished my robots! You destroyed my Laser-Matic 3000! You ruined my one chance to take over the world! But you won't live to tell the tale!" Dr. Dapper pulled out his Dapper Matic 2000 ray gun and pointed it at George, Harold, and Captain Underpants. Stretch! Captain Underpants quickly stretched a pair of underwear and shot it at Dr. Dapper. The underwear landed right on the evil doctor's head. "Help!" cried Dr. Dapper. I can't see! George and Harold ran out of the warehouse as fast as they could. "Great shot, Captain Underpants!" cried Harold. "There's just one thing I don't understand," said George. "Where did you get the extra pair of underwear?" "What extra pair?" said Captain Underpants. "Wow!" "Oh, no. Never mind that," cried George. "Let's just get out of here before that laser-matic 2000 thing kaboom explodes." The laser-matic 2000 blew up, tearing apart the old warehouse. It sent flaming shards of red-hot metal in every direction. Fire fell from the skies around our heroes, and the earth began to crumble beneath their feet. "Oh no!" cried Harold. "We're doomed!" Boom! Chapter 18. To make a long story short, they got away. Chapter 19. Back to school. George, Harold, and Captain Underpants made a quick stop outside the police station. They tied Dr. Dapper to a lamp post and attached a note to him. "There," said Captain Underpants. "That ought to explain everything." "Arrest me. Police station. Back in 50 minutes. Please don't commit any crimes until we return." Then George and Harold led Captain Underpants back to Jerome Hotwit Elementary School. "Why are we going here?" asked Captain Underpants. "Well," said George, "you have to do some undercover work here." "Yeah," said Harold, reaching into his backpack. "Put these clothes on and make it snappy." "Don't forget your hair," said George. Captain Underpants quickly got dressed and behind some bushes. "Well, how do I look?" he asked. "Pretty good," said George. "Now try to look really mad." Captain Underpants made the nastiest face he could. "You know," said Harold, "this kind of looks like Mr. Croup." "Harold," whispered George. "Yes, Mr. Croup." "Oh, yeah," said Harold. "I almost forgot." Before long, they were all back inside Mr. Croup's office. "Okay, Captain Underpants," said George. "You are now Mr. Croup." "Snap your fingers," whispered Harold. "Oh, yeah," said George. "Snap. You are now Mr. Croup." "What's Mr. Croup?" asked Captain Underpants. "Oh, no," cried Harold. "It's not working." The boys tried again and again to hypnotize Captain Underpants, but nothing seemed to work. Said Harold. "Let me see the instruction manual for the ring." George checked his pants pockets. Said George. "I think I lost it." "You what?" said Harold. The two boys searched frantically through the office, but the 3D Hypno Ring instruction manual was nowhere to be found. "Never mind," said George. "I have an idea." He removed the flowers from a large vase in the corner. Then he poured out all the water over Captain Underpants' head. "Why did you do that for?" cried Harold. "I saw him do this in a cartoon once," said George, "so it's got to work." After a few minutes, Mr. Croup slowly came to. "What's going on here?" he demanded. "And why am I all wet?" George and Harold had never been so glad to see Mr. Croup in all their lives. "I'm so happy I could cry," said Harold. "Well, you're gonna cry when I give that videotape to the football team," shouted Mr. Croup. "I've had it with you too." Principal Croup took the videotape out of his file cabinet. "You boys are dead meat," he sneered. He stormed out of his office with the video and headed towards the gym. George and Harold smiled. "Wait till the football team see that video," said Harold. "Yeah," said George. "I sure hope they like singing Purple Dragon." Hey, look, said George. I found the 3D Hypno Ring instruction manual. It was in my shirt pocket, not my pants pocket. Well, throw that thing away, said Harold. We'll never need it again. I sure hope not, said George. Trash. Chapter 10. Chapter 20. The end. La 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 la, we love boomer, la 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 la. Papa Jungle, sing along, friends. Things at Jerome Hartswade Elementary School were never quite the same after that fateful day. The football team enjoyed Mr. Cribb's videos so much that they changed their name from the Knuckleheads to the Purple Dragon Sing-Along Friends. The name change didn't go over too well with the fans, but hey, who's going to argue with a bunch of linebacks? George and Harold went back to their old ways, pulling pranks, cracking jokes, and making new comic books. They had to keep an eye on Mr. Cribb, though. Snap. Because for some strange reason, every time he heard the sound of fingers snapping, snap, Principal Cribb turned back into... You know who? Oh no, cried Harold. Here we go again, said George. Tra-la-la-la! Captain Underpants. The end. About the author. When Dave Baker was in elementary school, he was always getting into trouble for pulling pranks, cracking jokes, and making silly comic books. In second grade, he invented his most famous or infamous character, Captain Underpants. Dave's teacher told him, "You'd better straighten up, young man, because you can't spend the rest of your life making silly books." Dave was not a very good listener. Have you read your Underpants today? I'm sure you enjoyed this book we read aloud today. There'll be more Captain Underpants books. Let's say 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. We're going to read them aloud. I'm going to read them aloud to you very soon. So don't forget to subscribe to my channel. And I'll see you soon. Bye. Bye-bye.